Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. David Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new teen therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. David is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda.
Hello, David.
Hello, Dave.
Hi.
And welcome, everyone, to episode 163. Before we begin, I'm hoping to read some endorsements that you got, because I think they're always fun. There are two of them. One came after our episode 158, which was on changing the focus, one of the advanced secrets of effective communication. And Dave Freibush was there, as he is here today. And the comment was from Chris P. And Chris wrote, "I like it when you all do personal work. It sometimes sounds so easy when talking about the techniques, but I can see that even for professionals, it can be hard for the ego. I also like y'all having Dave Freibush there. He fits in great. I think it adds a nice dynamic, and it's nice to get another's thoughts about the same thing. I want to thank you, Rhonda and David, for these great podcasts, and Fabrice and others for the past ones. I have listened to them all and highly recommend them."
Thank you so much. And before we go on, we really appreciate it when you folks recommend the podcast to others. One of these days we'll get a better marketing campaign. But right now we just depend on you folks by word of mouth. And I think this month that we're in right now, which is September, will probably hit 90,000 downloads again.
Wow.
And so it definitely has been building. Everything you folks do helps us a lot. And that's also a nice endorsement of your contributions, Dave. And I've gotten other endorsements too, saying that it's nice to have a layperson, a general citizen here as a part of the podcast.
Well, it's great to be here as the person who knows nothing.
Yeah, well, we know nothing, but we pretend to know something.
Right. So this next comment was after our episode 160 when we did work with Marilyn, and that just published recently. And this person's read or saw the podcast on YouTube or heard the podcast on YouTube, and he said, or she said, "I just wanted to add that your book, Feeling Good, has helped me so much in my own mental illness. You have no idea how positive an effect that book made on my life. And this episode about Marilyn is very interesting and informative. It's great that you guys are doing this. What a wonderful YouTube discovery when I looked you up on here a few months back. Thank you so much."
Well, thank you so much for that too. And also, the only problem with listening on YouTube is you don't get the show notes. And I don't think you do, at any rate. So you can go to my website, feelinggood.com, and then click on the Feeling Good podcast tab. And then in the right-hand column, you can just sign up for the mailing list. And all the mailing list means is that you'll get the notification of every new podcast. And when you listen on the website, you'll have all the show notes. And also there's a list of all the past show notes that you can click on with links, so you can get the show notes for any of the 160 or so podcasts we've done so far. And I would say that the show notes, if you really want to learn and if you like what we're doing, they'll enhance the experience for you, because sometimes I put in a lot of time to write really good show notes that illuminate what we're talking about, and then there's tools for you, and like the list of the 5 secrets of effective communication, and lots of extra free goodies for you. There was one more endorsement that we got from this woman named Rhonda.
Oh, what a great name. What a great name.
She sent me an email or a phone message or something about this Changing the Focus podcast we did. Maybe, do you know Rhonda?
I know her vaguely. I probably need to know her better. Well, I've been working with you or taking courses with you since 2013. And you say over and over again, one of the main failures for therapy is trying to help the other person. And I always thought I knew what that meant. And
one of the biggest errors
one of the
is
biggest
trying
errors.
to help the other person
Right.
without taking into account their empathy and their resistance and finding out if they want help. Just diving into help is a huge error. We're going to have the next podcast on that, actually.
Yeah. And so I always thought that meant, well, if somebody asked me a direct question like, should I leave my partner, or should I go on this job interview, or should I do something X, whatever it is, I thought, well, that's what he means. I'm not, it's not a really good idea that I should answer that question. And I thought, nah, but I learned that in graduate school a million years ago. So I kind of didn't 100% pay attention to it, which is sort of my own arrogance. And but after we did the podcast on changing the focus, and I talked to you about my sister, and we did the role play, and I did such a poor job. And what I wanted to say was, look, why don't you do this? If you do this, if you come to our house and say goodbye to my son, then that will solve everything. And to me, that wasn't trying to help.
That's what you were saying to your sister, not to David.
Well, that's what I was saying in the role play.
Yeah, right.
And to me, I was expressing my frustration. And when we talked about it,
you were trying to solve the problem.
Right. When we talked about it, I didn't realize I was solving the problem. I thought what I was doing was telling my feelings.
Yeah.
But then when the podcast came out and I listened to it, and I actually listened to it twice because it was so powerful to me, and I wanted to really hear what I had to do before I talked to my sister, it finally came clear that when I said that, or if I had said that to my sister, why don't you do this that I'm asking you to, then I was solving the problem of my negative thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
And just sort of a light bulb went off that solving a problem doesn't necessarily mean like telling someone what to do, but it also talks about, telling the person what I want or what I need instead of listening to their feelings and listening to their experience.
Yeah, and sharing your own feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really neat. And that was why was that a light bulb for you?
Because it actually led to a conversation that was really successful.
Yeah.
And probably because I do that all the time. When I think I'm talking about my feelings, but really what I'm saying is what I want someone to do instead.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Absolutely. And sharing your feelings is a much more trusting and gentle and effective way of connecting with someone, because people don't like being told what to do. And in addition, when you're stuck with somebody, generally the problem is that you're trying to solve some problem, or you're trying to win some game you're playing with them. You're arguing and trying to prove who's right or whatever. And the solution isn't instead to share your feelings and to acknowledge theirs, to deal with what's going on between the two of us in a kindly way. But I can say things like this over and over again, and people don't get it.
Yeah.
And so and part of what we're doing that's so exciting is because there are a lot of really ancient truths and the kind of therapy that we're teaching and doing. And when you really see these things, it's like a light bulb goes on in your head. And that's what's fun about teaching, is the challenge of trying to make these things clear to people. Like when you say to people, the whole basis of cognitive therapy is that you create your own emotions at every moment of every day, that what happens to you cannot have any effect on your feelings until you put a spin on it, until you interpret it. And then it's your thoughts that create your depression, your anxiety, your guilt, your anger, and everything. Well, that's been known for at least 2,500 years, but it's so basic people don't get it. They still think that it's the other person who's making me angry. It's the other person who's hurting my feelings, or it's this disappointing event that's making me depressed or anxious or whatever. And another basic one is that we create our own interpersonal reality at every moment of every day. We go around feeling like victims, saying, why is this person treating me so shabbily? What's wrong with him? What's wrong with her? She's got no right saying that, or he's got no right feeling that way. Whereas when you use our interpersonal model and write down one thing the other person said, and write down exactly what you said next, one exchange that didn't work, you'll see the whole cause of the conflict, and you'll see that you're actually forcing the other person to treat you in the very way you're complaining about. And that's another form of enlightenment. The Buddha saw that 2,500 years ago, but yet people still don't get it, that we're creating our own emotional reality and our own external relationship reality all the time.
Cool. Okay, so this podcast episode is on another Ask David about general questions. So shall I read to you the first question?
Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Burns. I would love to talk to you. I have been going to a wonderful counselor for several years, and he is the one who recommended your book.
He's got to be a bright guy, though.
Yeah, he does. Well-trained. And my question is, how can you overcome anxiety without taking medicine? I've been on a very low dose medicine for years and would love to discontinue, but when I try, the anxiety seems to come back. Thank you, Lisa.
Well, I have a few things to say, and you guys might have some stuff to say too. First of all, I don't know what medicine you're taking, and I can't prescribe or treat anyone in this forum, but usually benzodiazepines are given for anxiety, like Valium and Xanax and Librium and Ativan and things like that. And they're wonderful anti-anxiety agents, but the problem is if you take them for more than 3 weeks, you'll probably get addicted. And what the addiction means is when you try to go off of it, you'll have increased anxiety for several weeks and insomnia. And that's probably why you took the pills in the first place. So then you'll wrongly conclude that you need to keep taking the dose or even taking more, and your doctor will make that same mistake. And that's how people get hooked. And that's why I would say I would never anymore prescribe a benzodiazepine for someone who's anxious, especially since we've now got so many fantastic drug-free techniques that we can talk about in just a minute. But I know this from personal experience because when Xanax came out, that's a benzo, like Valium. They said, oh, this is not addictive and this is a new breakthrough drug. The drug companies will say almost anything to sell a new drug. And so I used to have trouble getting to sleep. And so one night I took the tiniest dose of Xanax and I chewed it and drank water. So that's like taking a shot then. It goes right into your blood. And so I fell asleep in 20 minutes and I slept like a baby. And I woke up the next morning feeling totally refreshed with no side effects. And I said, my gosh, this is a magic pill. This is better than French fries or something. So then I got into where I took them like every night, just the same tiny little dose. And then after a while, I learned that they're actually addictive. So I said, I better try to get off of them. And when I tapered off of them, I got that exact thing, intense anxiety and insomnia. But I decided to tough it out. It took about 3 or 4 weeks, and then I was sleeping normally again. And I was on a very tiny dose of Xanax. But that could be, why your anxiety comes back, and you may just have to stay off of the drug and tough out that increased anxiety until it goes away. They did a study at Harvard on how to get people off of Valium and Xanax and who were addicted, and they divided about 100 people who were addicted to benzodiazepines, into 2 groups, and half of them they slowly tapered them by top Harvard experts, switching them to Klonopin, which is a long-acting benzo that's supposedly easier to withdraw from, and then slowly tapering off of that. That was one group. The other group got the exact same treatment with Klonopin, slow taper, but added cognitive therapy groups once a week to help them learn other techniques to cope with the anxiety. And the group that got pure psychopharmacology management, only 20% of them were able to withdraw. And they concluded that the withdrawal to benzodiazepines can be as difficult as the addiction to heroin. It's hard to get off of. But in the cognitive therapy group that got the benzo withdrawal, slow withdrawal plus cognitive therapy, 80% of them were able to withdraw. So there are a lot of drug-free techniques you can use to fight anxiety. And David's been talking so much, so now Rhonda and Dave will talk about something or talk about those other techniques.
I'm curious if Lisa, we don't know what she's taking, but what if it's another type of drug like an SSRI? Would you say, would you have?
Well, there can also be withdrawal associated from them, and so I would say the main thing, but you can, again, have to taper slowly. I would say for anything involving drugs, talk to your doctor and work it out with that person. I'm just giving general information, but the antidepressants aren't addictive in the traditional sense because they don't actually do anything beneficial for your mood. They have a placebo effect, but they do attach very tightly to brain receptors. The drug companies figured out how to make massively potent drugs that affect serotonin receptors in the brain because they had this wrong theory that depression is due to low serotonin, which it isn't. But if you've been taking one of those drugs, although it's not a true antidepressant, it will have powerful effects on your brain. And when you go off of these drugs, a certain percentage of people, I don't know if it's 20% or what it is exactly, but they have like electric shock effects and a variety of unpleasant withdrawal effects. And those can be managed if you have a good medical doctor you're working with who's familiar with that and can guide you through it.
And I just want to reiterate from the Stanford study, but completely anecdotally, that I've had referrals from a lot of psychiatrists who know that I'm doing Team CBT and saying that their patients are saying that they want to eliminate or reduce their use of anti-anxiety meds. And but they said they wouldn't take them off their meds until they had a good relationship with CBT therapist who could help them learn how to defeat their negative thoughts. And they all have gotten off their medications.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's been really that's an exciting part of my practice.
To learn about the drug-free techniques for overcoming anxiety, you can check my book, When Panic Attacks. I'll put a link in the show notes. It's very inexpensive paperback you can get on Amazon. And then again, if you go to my website, to any page, there's a search function in the right-hand panel, and you can type in social anxiety, and then your podcast with 2 sessions curing Rhonda of social anxiety will come up. We just did a podcast on high-speed cure for severe obsessive-compulsive disorder.
Right.
And that'll come up, and you can see all kinds of good tutoring podcasts on these new techniques for drug-free treatment of anxiety.
Okay, here's question number 2. Hello, Dr. Burns.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, Mike. This is from Mike. I'm terrified that this may be the most boring question you have ever received, but I'll press on nonetheless. I often experience very vivid dreams after listening to your podcasts. In fact, I recently dozed off after listening to one of your podcasts on procrastination, number 75. And I forgot to turn off my phone. In my dream, I was in my childhood house and could hear you, Dr. Burns, talking away in some far corner of the house. And I was getting really quite annoyed and angry at you. Or getting quite annoyed and angry. I really wanted to find you to tell you to just shut up, but I couldn't get the words out in my dream. When I woke up, podcast number 77 was playing, which seemed to explain some of my unconscious hostility. I struggle with most of my relationships and don't really want to deal with all the hard work I have to do to improve them. So there you have it. Thanks for listening to me and for all your Herculean efforts on behalf of all those in the struggle to grow. Mike.
Well, thank you, Mike. That's really neat. And I loved your email. I love the emails of everyone who sends emails in. We've just been getting fantastic emails lately, and I appreciate all of them. The interpretation of what a dream means is actually what I didn't learn in psychiatric residency. I learned it from my father. He was a minister, and he explained it to me when I was growing up, and I've never heard a better explanation. It seems to fit really well, that your dream is a symbolic expression of how you're feeling. So maybe you're angry with me. A lot of people say, I talk too much. I'm talking too much right now. And that's, you were getting kind of pissed off at David or ticked off, sorry, in your dream. Or maybe there's somebody you are kind of angry with, and you disguise it as you'd be angry with David, so you wouldn't have to think about the person you really are angry with. But it's a neat theory, and it fits really well. And I used to have this severe public speaking anxiety, and I was invited to give a lecture in Stony Brook, New York, at some hospital. And I was going to get up early and get on the train from Philadelphia to wherever it was, Stony Brook, New York or something, and then give this talk. But the thing about it was that I wasn't used to giving grand rounds. This was a new experience for me, and I imagine they'd all be incredibly brilliant and critical, which they weren't anything at all like that. And so as I woke up, I had a dream that I had a broken jaw. And when I woke up, I didn't realize it was a dream, and I thought I actually had a broken jaw. Now, what was my dream symbolizing? What was my dream telling myself?
That you were anxious about this talk, and if your jaw was broken, you wouldn't be able to give it, so you wouldn't have to go.
Yeah, or since I did have to go, I'd have to be talking with a broken jaw and wouldn't be been able to do a good job. So it's just a simple interpretation of that. That's how you interpret a dream. And I've had patients who I was treating who, when they started to recover, they started to have these fabulously happy dreams. Like one about this guy who's on a bicycle, and he was the fastest bicyclist in the world. He could even fly through the air with his bicycle, because Dave, I know you're a great bicyclist, and stuff like that. And that's true too. And I've had that kind of dream when I was feeling really happy and confident about my life, and then suddenly had a dream that I was making these fantastic breakthroughs, or some wonderful thing was happening. Have you ever had a positive dream or a negative dream?
Oh yeah, I had a negative dream the other day where I was watching a movie about Sobibor, which was a concentration camp where the people in the concentration camp, there was an uprising and they escaped, and a lot of people were killed in the process. And it just came out in 2019, and it was made by Russians, not Americans, and it was extremely violent and vivid. And that night I had a dream, not that I was in a concentration camp, but I was being persecuted in some way.
Yeah.
And it was really scary. But I had a really positive dream when I was pregnant with my son. I dreamt I was pushing a stroller, and my husband said, "Hand me my son." And and I woke up and said, "Oh, we're having a boy."
That's fantastic.
And that was super positive.
That's interesting.
That was fun.
I'm
What
impressed
about you, Dave?
Well, I'm surprised by how little how infrequently I remember my dreams. But the negative dream that comes up, and I still have it sometimes, and I'm pretty far removed from school, is that the dream of like I'm late for the final exam.
Oh,
or
I
the
have
class.
that thing too.
Right.
It's
So crazy. It's like,
or like what happens to me. It's like they're going to have this big exam in medical school.
yeah.
But I've been cutting classes, or I forgot to go to
Yeah,
class, or
right,
something like
right.
that.
Like I forgot to drop that class that I'm still registered for now at the final tomorrow.
It's
Yeah.
real panicky.
Yeah.
Then another one I have that all the time. I dream that I'm somewhere, but I forgot how to get home. Like I'm in an airport or someplace, and then I can't find my wallet either for my address, and I'm kind of trying to ask people, but I don't know what to ask.
I've had a similar kind of dream too, where it's like there's an obstacle. You just have to get from point A to point B, and
Yeah.
all these crazy obstacles come up in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah, and so this is just an expression of how you're feeling in your life at a certain time.
Yeah, I can tell you how to remember your dreams better.
How?
So if you get really active right after you wake up, your dreams will go away. But if you lay in bed for a few moments, just quietly, and try to not think too much, but just
Seems to describe me every morning.
it'll be easier to remember your dreams if you just take some time. Here's question number 3. David, I have a question about our strong attraction or inclination to negative thoughts. Are our psychological processes cyclical? People seem to recycle the same negative thought for years. Even if we produce a strong alternative thought or reattribution, it may not be a default choice the next time we have that negative thought. How can we make the alternative positive thoughts a conscious choice? Thanks, Rajesh.
Right. Rajesh always sends us fabulous questions, and so I love your question once again, Rajesh. And I would say that negative thoughts are repetitious but not cyclical. And what I mean by that is that there is bipolar manic depressive illness where people can cycle in and out of mania and depression. the cycles aren't predictable, but it is an organic extreme high and an extreme low, and it has to be damped by lithium sometimes, or some other medication. The prognosis is really good. But for the most, and sometimes women having their period, they'll think a certain time of the month they get more vulnerable to being angry or depressed or irritable or whatever. But the thing that is recurrent is that I think that human beings have an inherent tendency to negativity. And Albert Ellis, the noted and notorious New York psychologist, who I really love the guy, but he was a wild man. But he did a lot of original great work. And he wrote a paper once on the impossibility of having consistently good mental health. And what he meant by that was no one can be happy all the time. And that's what the Buddha said also. But so even if you've recovered from depression, and you went from severe depression to euphoria, that I see frequently, we can say there's a 100% chance that those negative thoughts will come back again. Now, I've been working with the neuroscientist Mark Noble, who will be here, by the way, maybe even for tonight's group. I'm not sure.
Oh, cool.
But he's flying out, or he'll be here Sunday for the hike for sure. But he's going to write a chapter. He's written it already for my new book on team CBT and the brain. And he's talked about how when you're doing team therapy, you're doing micro neurosurgery, you're activating selective circuits when you do the daily mood log that are firing over and over in your brain. And then when you do the positive thoughts and you crush the negative thoughts, you're actually creating new neural circuits. And that's why the homework is important, and why it's so important to continue practicing talking back to your negative thoughts through role play or through written exercises outside of the therapy session, because that strengthens these new neural circuits. And we can't promise anyone that you'll be happy forever. I'm not happy all the time. I don't think anyone could be, and I don't think it would even be desirable, to tell you the truth. But when I fall in a black hole and everything starts getting anxiety-provoking and dark, and then I have techniques I can use to pop out of it very, very quickly. And so I think that's what we can offer to human beings, is that you're entitled to be happy most of the time, but not all of the time. And that when you hit a bump in the road, we have techniques that will work for you, because the neat thing is, once a technique has worked for you, it will work for you for the rest of your life. So that's a really cool thing, because for each person, we all have different negative thoughts, but for each person, the negative thoughts will always be the same when they come back, some version of the exact same theme.
Do you think that some people are more disposed to having negative thoughts be kind of a default thought, and some people are more disposed to having positive thoughts be a default thought?
Yeah, and if we could figure that out, we'd be candidates for the Nobel Prize, I think, because then we'd be getting at the actual cause of happiness and depression. But it's probably a strong genetic part, and probably some learning and environmental causes as well. We just really don't know.
Kind of makes me think of there's the idea that when you walk by a restaurant that has lots of people in it, you assume that everybody in there knows that this is a good restaurant, that's why there's lots of people. But you could also look at it as there were two restaurants next to one another, and the first couple walked down the street and they randomly chose the first one. They chose restaurant A. And then the next people come and they say, oh, there's people in restaurant A. And then everybody else does that, and so they all wind up in restaurant A. And it kind of reinforces restaurant A, even though it was completely random. It wasn't like everybody knew this was better. It was just a random choice by the first people. And I wonder if one's disposed to negative thoughts, you just practice that. You end up practicing that all the time.
Yes, that's right.
And that reinforces
that's
it.
Right.
And that's why
that's right.
It becomes,
That's exactly right, because you see, neurons that fire together wire together.
Yeah.
So the more you think those negative thoughts, the more powerful those negative circuits become. That's exactly right. Yeah. And then also conventional therapy, the kind I was trained in at Penn as a psychiatric resident, you just have the patient come in and verbalize negative things all the time, and you encourage them to keep talking. And you could argue that actually is training in continuing to be depressed. It makes your depression and anger and anxiety more powerful.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's enough said about that. That was really interesting. Thank you for that contribution. That was interesting.
Can you hear Rhonda okay when she's talking?
I'm kind of mumbling. I was just saying, thanks, Dave. I thought that was a really great illustration.
It may seem they're really like the restaurant analogy did.
Yeah,
I like that.
there
was some sense to it. But
yeah,
it may seem
I didn't get it until you explained it at the end.
You didn't get it to the end?
I was going to say, we went to this restaurant that didn't have anyone in it, and it stunk.
But the basic thing that you're saying is that it's kind of hopeful.
Oh, yeah.
It's hopeful to know that, there's, you can learn a lot of these great techniques and learn how to create positive thoughts and, defeat negative thoughts and et cetera. But, you're going to reach a bump in the road.
Yeah.
And that's normal. And it's not anything to throw you off completely and think, oh, I'm a terrible person, or I'll never get better. It's like, no, here's a little bump.
Yeah.
Do what worked, and let's
give yourself
move on.
permission to be unhappy a day or two a week.
Yeah.
And then you have the right to be happy 5 days a week. That's all I'm expecting.
But
I've got 5 happy days a week. I figure I'm in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
But also, even if it's not a bump, just to say like, hey, I've got a lot of years of training in these negative thoughts. They're gonna come back even if it's not a bump.
And that's why the forceful effort of doing the homework is so important, and why I refuse to work with a patient who refuses to do homework, because the prognosis for recovery with my tools is 0. I've never had a patient who refused homework who recovered.
Yeah, that's what I tell my patients too. Okay, here's the next question. I'm in sales. Hi, David. This person is in sales. I have been struggling with anxiety for the last 18 months and recently faced up to the fact I have also been suffering from depression. And then I discovered your podcasts. I have been spending a lot of time on the episodes I believe I can benefit from the most. I have found your solutions to be the most beneficial I have come across. Thank you for sharing your ideas and techniques with all of us. A couple of questions. How would you advise constructing a workday to reduce anxiety? I work in sales and feel anxious before every phone call or visit I encounter, and the anxiety can be for the reasons that seem to be related solely to each sales encounter on an individual basis. And my anxiety will grow as the day goes on. My second point is, would there be a benefit in monitoring positive thoughts and feelings throughout the day, like happiness and hopefulness rather than negative feelings? Thanks, Rudy.
Okay, well, that's another great question, and I have a special soft spot in my heart for people who are involved in sales, because I started doing door-to-door sales when I was 7 or 8 years old, and I used the first thing I sold show tickets from door to door.
Oh, right.
And then when I was a teenager, I met this guy named Arthur Cosmo Russell in Phoenix. And he got me selling Cosmos, the Cosmos cockroach powder, which I would sell for 50 cents a bottle. I would go through these bad neighborhoods where they had a lot of cockroaches, and then I got, I think, 15 cents commission on each bottle I sold. And he said, you can tell the people that it's safe, even you can have your children eat it. It's only toxic for cockroaches. And then I sold tick powder door to door. I sold Ford Econoline vans door to door. And I'm still involved in sales, really. My books, the therapy, selling people on happiness. There's a lot of sales in life. Now, there's 2 things I think can be really helpful if you're in sales. I'll just allude to them. Maybe we'll do a whole podcast on it with more detail. But first, it isn't like it's going to be different from each person. Your anxiety will have the same themes underneath, like fear of rejection, need for approval, that type of thing. And I would just pick up one of my books, like Feeling Good, the New Mood Therapy, or the Feeling Good Handbook, and use a daily mood log and write down your negative thoughts. Like what are you telling yourself before each sales encounter? Like, oh, I'll probably screw up, and I'm not smart enough, and what if I get rejected, and things like that. and learning to talk back to those thoughts and overcoming your fear of rejection, which is the most likely cause of your anxiety as a salesperson, will help you in all of those encounters. Second, you said, could you track happy and hopeful feelings rather than negative feelings? Anything you come up with is worth a try. And, if it helps you, it's great. But I don't think that's going to be a substitute. That's like a distraction from what's making you anxious. And so I think learning to talk back to the distorted negative thoughts that are causing the anxiety is more of a meaningful cure for you. One other thing is that you might also want to read my book, Feeling Good Together, about the 5 secrets of effective communication, because I've done a lot of presentations for salespeople at conferences, and I used to consult for this editor of a magazine called Personal Selling Power. And he got, his name was Gerhard Schwantner or something like that. He probably is still publishing the magazine today. But it's all about effective and ineffective ways to sell. And as it turns out, I argued to him that salespeople are trained in all the worst things to do to make a sale. And that it's like to promote yourself and promote your product. And that doesn't work because it turns people off. It's all me, me, me. And effective salespeople are ones who relate to the customer as a friend, as someone they care about. And if the customer criticizes something, you disarm them, find a truth in their criticism, and befriend them with stroking and empathy and stuff. And that is the dynamite formula for sales success. And I actually learned that from my mother, because we didn't have much money. My dad was a minister, and so when we were in college, she went to work part-time selling women's clothing at a department store on a part-time basis. And she didn't get commission sales or anything. It was just, when probably she got $3 or $4 an hour. But she told me that she had trouble with some of the other salespeople. And I said, well, why is that? And she says, well, when I go in there, a lot of women stand in line because they want me to wait on them, and they won't let the other salespeople wait on them. And my sales are the highest of anyone in the store. And then she said people get hurt and jealous and sometimes about it. I said, well, if you're part-time and you're even outselling the full-time people, she said, yeah. And I said, well, what's the secret? How do you do it? And she said, well, I don't try to sell to anybody. They come in and I realize they're human, they're women. Maybe they have a bad marriage or they're worried about their son or daughter. And so I just talk to them about their lives. She says I'm kind of like an amateur psychiatrist, I think. But my mom was also good at fabrics. And she actually passed that along to me because I can see women's clothing really well. I'm just looking at the wall. But I can sense when things are like dynamite, the way they go together.
Yeah.
And I picked that up from my mom. So she would say, oh, here's something that would look good on you, or here's something on sale. It's not very expensive. And so they bought like crazy, but she wasn't trying to sell. And so I have just tremendously strong feelings about you, Rudy, and your wonderful note, which is really touches me. And I hope to hear from you again.
I just want to give Rudy credit for going in and talking to those people in the sales capacity while feeling those feelings. Like that's a lot of takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, it takes tremendous courage.
Yeah.
But all the techniques, the downward arrow technique, identify the distortions, the self-disclosure. There's just so many fabulous techniques that he could be using to combat and crush that anxiety.
Yeah. Once he crushes the anxiety and the negative thoughts that he's having, and he creates a list of positive thoughts, do you think it would be helpful after doing the work to eliminate the negative thoughts? To carry along the list of the positive thoughts so that when the negative thoughts come up, he can say, oh, yeah, I know how to defeat that. Here's my card with all the positive thoughts that I created.
Yeah, that's great. Or if you want to count positive thoughts too, you would just wear a golf counter like maybe you can do it on your cell phone. Just keep, every time you have a positive thought, count it like a golfer has a counter on his wrist or her wrist, and the number goes up. And yeah, you could, all of these things mean you're working at it.
Yeah.
And if it's helpful for you, go for it. If it doesn't help you, go on to something else, because we have over 200 techniques. So.
Yeah, right. Here's the next one. Hi, Dr. Burns. I'm a big fan and believe that you are the greatest living psychiatrist of our time.
I didn't quite hear that. What was that? Could you repeat that? That's why I chose this question.
Yeah, that's right. I've seen you in person and heard your recent PESI presentation. Quick question. When exposure is used to get rid of anxiety, what do you think is the mechanism in the brain? It works paradoxically. Instead of strengthening a neural network, it extinguishes it. Do you have any ideas how? Thanks for your time. And again, I've learned so much from you in my over 30-year career. Thank you for that also. Sincerely, Dr. Mark.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dr. Mark. I appreciate your kind words. And I can only speculate a couple things why exposure works. And first of all, let me say it's only one of 4 models I use in treating anxiety. Exposure is not a treatment for anxiety. It's just one tool out of more than 100 tools that I've developed or learned that you can use to combat anxiety. But it's one of the most important. And one reason it works is that when you stop running away from what you're afraid of and you confront the monster, you'll discover that the monster has no teeth, and that puts you into a state of enlightenment. And that's the whole basis of Tibetan Buddhism. It's one of the goals of meditation. And it's certainly been true of me. I've had over 17 different anxiety disorders at least that I've had to overcome through exposure. Like I've had severe fear of bees, blood, heights, vomiting, public speaking, blood. Did I say blood?
You said blood.
Blood. I've had all, I can't even remember them. There've been so many of them. But so I know that when you confront dogs, I used to have intense fear of dogs, horses, but when you, like I interact with dogs all the time now. I see them on the hikes. I go up, say, "Oh, you're so cute," and I pet them, and they lick my face. It's kind of gross, but it's kind of fun. And you discover when you confront the thing that you're afraid of, instead of running away, you discover that the monster has no teeth. I'm working with someone right now who is shy. In fact, he might be on a podcast with us in a week or two.
Fun.
He's going to come in from the East Coast. But he gets anxious around people, and then he tries to hide it because he thinks people will reject him and that a man shouldn't feel anxious. And so his assignment is to tell people anytime he feels anxious, just to tell them, and then to ask them, if they're what they think about what he just said. And he's just been discovering that when he's vulnerable and open with people, they seem to like him more. But he couldn't have discovered that if he hadn't confronted the monster. A second reason that exposure works is that after a while, anxiety wears out. Your brain can't manufacture anxiety on an ongoing basis. And so if you use, say, cognitive flooding, let's say you have a fear of airplanes, and you fantasize the plane crashing, just sit and fantasize it, and see if you can make yourself 100% anxious. And in an exposure, you try to keep it as high as possible for as long as possible. And if you stick with it, rather than running away or taking a pill or distracting yourself, you'll discover after a period of time that the anxiety just diminishes and disappears. And we'll have someone on the podcast too who is recovering now from a very severe flying phobia, and she has a dramatic story to tell with us. And the last thing that people say is that when you use exposure, you discover that you can endure anxiety, that it's not going to hurt you, or that you don't have to run away from the anxiety, that it's unpleasant, but it's not like as horrible as what you
It's not going to kill you.
Any other thoughts that you guys have on why exposure works?
I think one thing is that if you avoid the exposure, as you've said, if you end up avoiding the exposure, then you actually make the fear worse in the long. That by not.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. The avoidance of the thing you're afraid of. The behaviorists say that's the cause of anxiety.
Yeah.
And almost everyone with an so-called anxiety disorder is avoiding something they're afraid of, and that's why they're continuing to be afraid of. Let's do one last second question by Mark and then quit. We won't do the blushing one. We'll do that another time.
Okay, here's another one from Dr. Mark. Hi, Dr. Burns. You have my permission to use my question. Also, I do understand your impressive approach to treatment, not just exposure. And again, it's genius.
Could you just say that again? I like you, Dr. Mark. Send me more questions.
How much was he paid to ask these questions?
I also love that you see the connection between Buddhism and cognitive restructuring, whereas Dr. Beck only went as far back as Socrates and the Greek Stoic philosophers. I don't know if you ever read Dhammapada. Best translation I found is Eknath Eswaran, as it clearly states that our life is shaped by our mind, and that our feelings follow our thoughts just like a cart follows the ox that pulls it. Thanks again. Will you be coming to the East Coast again soon?
Well, that leads into the promotion for my upcoming Atlanta workshop. I don't often go to the East Coast anymore because it's such a long travel, but I'll be doing my first East Coast intensive in more than 25 years. November 4th to 7th, 2019, I'll be doing a 4-day intensive in Atlanta, Georgia on high-speed treatment of depression and anxiety disorders. That'll be my last intensive of the year. The first two that were this summer were just fantastic, and I'm hopeful that this one will be as good or nearly as good. If you want to attend or get more information about the November 4 to 7 Atlanta, Georgia intensive, go to my website, feelinggood.com, and to the workshop tab, upcoming workshops, and it's sponsored by Praxis, and you can click the link and get all the details, the price, the CE credits, where it's going to be, and would love to see you there, Dr. Mark. And lastly, I want to ask you about the link between what we're doing and meditation and kind of Buddhism and stuff like that, because you were just saying the other day that you were kind of surprised because I know you, Dave, are big on meditation and have done it for many years, and but there's tremendous overlap between Team CBT, what we're trying to achieve, and I think what meditation and Buddhism is trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the number of times you yourself reference, I know sometimes you do it a little facetiously, but there's truth in it too. You reference, the Buddha and but yeah, I do think, and especially when it comes to the 5 secrets, really being present and having, you've said sitting with open hands. And having that approach is, I think,
rather
really
than trying to change people, which is our next podcast. But also the thing of acceptance has been huge. The joy of letting go of your perfectionism and thinking you have to be something special, and just accepting yourself as average or even below average.
Yeah.
And then realizing what a joyous thing that can be. And for people who don't get it, that sounds horrible. They can't grasp how you could ever have joy without being special. And yet that's one of the liberation that you experience when you no longer are beating up on yourself for not being good enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially when we do when you do the role plays with people and playing the negative thought and the positive thought, I think the most powerful response always is to the negative thought is, yeah, you're guilty as charged, right? You're right.
Yeah. Say to me, David, I've heard you're quite screwed up.
David, I've heard you're quite screwed up.
Well, you heard right. I hope our listeners got the joke. Otherwise, our listenership will go way down next week. So.
Can I say one other thing about anxiety? Just hopping back to that conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, which is going to lead into our next podcast, because sometimes people reinforce their friends or their partners or their loved ones or just people in their anxiety by saying, "Well, I don't want you to feel bad, or I don't want you to have to go through the pain of facing your fear. So I will take care of you." Like, for a while, I had developed this sort of phobia about driving over overpasses, like really high ones.
Oh, I remember that.
Yes, you helped me overcome that, and my husband was like, "Oh, you never have to drive. Just don't worry, you will never have to drive." And I thought, "Oh, yeah, that's so safe." But it also
and feels good too.
And it feels good, like here's someone taking care of me, and he's trying to help. But actually, the help hurt me from overcoming this anxiety.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Be wary.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you, David, and
thank you, Rhonda and David.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you to our listeners. And see you next time. This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this episode under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. The theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.